It started with a letter. Not just any letter, a violation notice, and signed, slid halfway into the very mailbox it claimed was out of compliance. No explanation, no hearing, just a demand. Remove it or face daily fines. That was the moment I stopped being polite. The letter wasn't even inside the mailbox properly, just wedged in sideways, half crushed, like someone had delivered it with spite. There was no stamp, no return address, just an anonymous envelope with a single sheet of paper inside, printed in bold, capitalized font. Your mailbox violates HOA Aesthetic Compliance Code. Remove it within 7 days or face fines of $50 per day. No salutation, no signature, no reference code, no explanation, not even a copy of the alleged Aesthetic Compliance Code. Just that, an order. The air felt suddenly heavier as I read the paper again. The ink was slightly smudged, like it had been rushed off a printer in a fit of temper. I looked down at the mailbox, my mailbox, and tried to see it the way they saw it. It wasn't garish, wasn't offensive. It was a handcrafted piece, shaped like a vintage locomotive engine, rich with tones varnished to a deep gloss, brass trim polish to a golden shine, and small detailing work I'd spent 3 weekends carving. A child on a bike had stopped just yesterday to stare at it, whispering cool to no one in particular. I stepped back from it now, watching the morning light glint off its curved surface. It looked perfect, defiant, even. Maybe that's what they hated. Inside the house, the silence clung to the walls. I sat at the kitchen table and read the letter again, this time more slowly, more methodically. No contact number, no name, just the HOA's logo at the top. A vague oak tree silhouette with Community First written underneath it. Irony, I thought bitterly. By noon, I had called 3 different numbers listed on the HOA's quarterly newsletter. 2 went to voicemail. One was answered by someone who said they weren't authorized to discuss violation notices. I left messages. No one called back. The day passed like wet cement drying around my feet. Slow, heavy, inescapable. By the next morning, a second notice had been taped to my front door. This one was more curt. Non-compliance will result in escalated action. Final warning. Escalated how? I hadn't even been given a starting point. Who decided this mailbox was a violation? What rule had I broken? There were no measurements listed in the notice, no clauses quoted. Just more intimidation, dressed up in official formatting. I started digging. I pulled out every document the HOA had ever mailed since I'd moved in. I kept everything, the kind of person who files receipts and labels envelopes. I had the original community welcome packet, the complete bylaws, the fine schedule, even the landscaping guidelines. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, about mailboxes beyond a vague mention that they must be maintained in presentable condition. Presentable to whom? There were at least 3 mailboxes in the neighborhood visibly rusted through, one hanging sideways from a rotted post. No violations on those. I checked. I walked the block that night, snapping photos of mailboxes. One looked like it had been chewed on. Another had spray paint on the side, barely legible. My own, by contrast, gleamed under the porch light, clean lines and burnished wood glowing like amber. On the 3rd day, I showed up at the monthly HOA meeting. The room was a repurposed space inside the local library. Folding chairs, a folding table, and 5 members of the board seated like a tribunal. I waited until the open forum portion. When my turn came, I stood, letter in hand. I'm here about a violation notice, I began. 5 heads turned to me, none looking particularly interested. It says my mailbox is non-compliant, but it doesn't explain how, and I can't find anything in the rules that I've broken. The president, a tall man with silver hair and the expression of someone permanently unimpressed, didn't even look up from his papers. If it was issued, it was for a reason, he muttered. What reason? I pressed. It would have been reviewed by the Aesthetics Subcommittee. I checked the minutes from the last 3 meetings. There's no mention of any subcommittee like that. Who's on it? Silence. Another board member, a woman with large glasses and the fake smile of someone trying to stay out of things, finally spoke up. You'll need to submit a formal request for appeal. There's a process. I held up the letter again. There's no process listed on here. No instructions. Just threats. The president looked up finally, annoyed. We're not here to debate. Your 3 minutes are up. That was it. They dismissed me. Just like that. I left the library with my pulse hammering in my ears. It wasn't just a mailbox anymore. It was the way they didn't care. The way they operated behind paper walls and closed mouths. No explanation. No logic. Just quiet control. Back home, the mailbox sat waiting in the soft glow of the porch light. It looked proud, like it knew it didn't belong in a cage of rules and paint swatches. I reached out and ran my hand along its smooth curve. I didn't build it to make a statement. I built it because I missed working with my hands. Because the world was full of sterile, plastic things, and I wanted to put something real in it, something with texture and warmth. But if they wanted to fight, I'd give them one. I wouldn't tear it down. I'd build another, bigger, bolder, and this time, I put on wheels. It started as curiosity, mild, manageable curiosity, the kind that's satisfied with a Google search or a polite email. But when every inquiry about the so-called Mailbox Review Committee came up empty, that curiosity turned into obsession. I checked the HOA's official website first. A bare-bones affair with outdated meeting schedules, generic community photos, and a PDF download link titled Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CCRs. I opened the file, scrolled through it line by line, and searched for every mention of the word mailbox. 3 references, all vague, all unenforceable. None of them mentioned any aesthetic oversight committee. No mention of review boards, no committee listings, no hierarchy, no procedural protocol. Just silence. Next came the printed materials. I dug out the HOA welcome binder from the back of my filing cabinet, the one they handed out to new residents at closing. It included a laminated contact sheet, a block map, and a neatly stapled booklet titled Understanding Your Community. A quick flip through yielded the same result. No committee by that name, no explanation of who had the authority to issue violations, and certainly no detail about enforcement methods. So who were these people hiding behind faceless memos? I started asking neighbors. Cautiously at first. Hey, you ever hear of the Mailbox Review Committee? Blank stares. Shrugs. Some said no. Some looked like they wanted to say more, but didn't. One neighbor, a retired man named Alan who lived 2 houses down, leaned in like we were exchanging state secrets. There's no such committee, he whispered. There's just her. Her. He nodded toward a brick house with ivy-covered shutters. Linda, HOA president for 9 years. She runs it all. I stared at the house. Quiet, tidy, inoffensive. White hydrangeas in front. Not a single leaf on the driveway. I'd passed it 100 times. It never screamed power. But now that I looked harder, it didn't scream anything. It was designed to blend in. Alan tapped his nose. You didn't hear it from me. That evening, I scoured the HOA's meeting minutes, the last 12 months' worth. They were posted monthly, supposedly transcribed from the library gatherings. Dry, formulaic, and carefully sanitized. Discussions about lawn violations, budget updates, community garden hours. Never a name. Never a dissenting opinion. And definitely no mention of any aesthetic committee, which made the mailbox citation more suspicious. How could a committee issue a violation if it didn't appear anywhere, legally, administratively, or historically? I compiled everything. The printed violation, photos of other mailboxes in worse shape, screenshots from the HOA website, a highlighted copy of the CCRs, and the clean meeting records. Then I called the HOA again. No answer. The next day, I drove to the management company listed on the quarterly dues notice. It was located in a nondescript strip mall office with frosted glass and a receptionist who greeted me with practiced indifference. I'd like to speak with someone about a violation, I said. Are you a homeowner? Yes. Do you have an account number? I gave it. She typed it in. Her expression remained still. What kind of violation? A mailbox one, issued by a committee that doesn't seem to exist. That got her attention. She tapped on her keyboard again, this time more slowly. Then she stood. I'll check with Ms. Baker. Please wait here. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The office was quiet except for the faint hum of a copier in the back and the dull ticking of a wall clock. I stood by the reception desk, flipping through my notes again. Finally, the receptionist returned. Ms. Baker isn't available today. You'll need to submit your concern in writing. Can I get her email? She doesn't take unsolicited messages. But she works with the HOA, right? She works with the HOA. We're a third-party firm. We only process payments and distribute notices. So who decides the violations? That information isn't made public. The words hit harder than I expected. What do you mean, not public? Homeowners are not entitled to internal enforcement discussions. It's in the bylaws. No, I said calmly but firmly, it isn't. She blinked, but said nothing more. I left before I raised my voice. But in my head, something snapped. If there were no minutes, no records, no public names, and no transparency, then someone was operating without oversight, and that someone had decided my mailbox was a target. Back at home, I printed a flyer. Just a simple question, printed in bold. Who is the Mailbox Review Committee? I dropped one in every mailbox on the street that night. Quietly. No names. No accusations. Just a question meant to stir the still water. Within 2 days, I had 6 text messages from people I barely knew. All variations of the same story. Warnings about porch lights, flower colors, lawn gnomes. No hearings. No explanations. Just notices. Threats. Fines. One neighbor, a single mother who'd lived in the neighborhood for less than a year, admitted she'd received a violation for hanging a bird feeder. Another told me he'd been fined $100 for leaving his trash bin visible during non-collection hours. He worked nights and had forgotten to wheel it in before bed. That was all it took. These weren't rules. They were traps. But something was happening now, something different, a ripple, a shared understanding. People had been too polite to ask questions before. Now they were ready. So I went back to the next HOA meeting 1 week later. This time I brought documents. I brought statements. I brought photos of other mailboxes and letters from neighbors. When they called my name, I didn't ask politely. I'd like to know, I said, why a violation was issued for a mailbox that complies with every written standard. I'd like to know who sits on the committee that allegedly reviewed it. I like their names. I like their qualifications. I like their reasoning. I have 2 neighbors here tonight who received notices for unrelated items. They'd also like answers. A hush fell across the room. The board president, Linda, now confirmed, glanced down at her folder without speaking. Your concerns will be noted, the treasurer finally said. No, I replied. They won't, because I've read the minutes. I've read the bylaws. I know what's written down, and I know what isn't. Linda lifted her eyes. Cold, measured. This meeting is over, she said. But it wasn't. Not really. Because once you start asking questions that no one wants to answer, that's when the Real story begins. They said the mailbox was too large, too bold, too unconventional. They wanted me to shrink it, repaint it, remove the copper trim, straighten its character until it matched the rest of the neighborhood's bland lineup of standard-issue rectangles on sticks. But I'd had enough of shrinking, enough of pretending the little details didn't matter. If they wanted compliance, I'd give them something they'd never forget, something impossible to file under normal. It started with a utility trailer I found on a resale app. Rusted frame, warped wood flooring, 2 mismatched tires. Nothing fancy, just potential waiting under layers of neglect. I drove 40 miles to pick it up, paid in cash, and hauled it home like a secret plan coming to life. For the next 2 weeks, the driveway became my workshop. I cleared out the garage, rolled out the tarp, brought out the tools I hadn't touched in years. Angle grinder, orbital sander, clamps, rivets. This wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. This was resistance. Each morning, I wheeled the old trailer into the open, stripped it down, and began rebuilding from the base up. New axles, reinforced frame, pressure-treated decking. Slowly, deliberately, I began constructing the structure atop it, a towering replica of my original mailbox, but now scaled up like a prop from stage play. 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, just under 6 feet high, the legal limit for mobile recreational units, which I'd memorized from the county guidelines. This wasn't a mailbox anymore. It was a statement mounted on wheels. Neighbors began to notice. The first was a jogger who slowed to stare, headphones still in, mouthing the words, "What is that?" Then came the older couple from across the street. They watched from their porch, saying nothing for days until one afternoon, the husband wandered over. "You building something Artistic? He asked carefully. Not artistic, I said, just expressive. He chuckled. Well, it's impressive. Looks like it could tow a message across the state. Exactly. The mailbox itself was a masterpiece. Hand-sculpted wood paneling, shaped into a sleek hybrid of steampunk and Americana. Brushed aluminum gears on the side, polished rivets dotting the edges, and a working flag that raised when mail was inserted into the side slot. I even installed motion-triggered LED lights underneath to give it a glow at night, like it hovered an inch off the ground. The first time I rolled it to the curb, it felt like unveiling a monument. Neighbors stepped out of their homes, some with folded arms, some with quiet grins. A teenager across the street snapped a photo. A little girl clapped. I parked it at the edge of the driveway, right where my old mailbox once stood, just outside the sidewalk boundary. Technically not on HOA-controlled land. Technically not a structure. Legally, it was a mobile decorative unit, and I had the local ordinance number highlighted in printouts, just in case. By sunset, I had received my first new letter, this time hand-delivered by a woman I didn't recognize. She didn't introduce herself, just handed me the envelope, nodded stiffly, and left. Inside, mobile installations fall under visual disruption clauses if stationary beyond 48 hours. If not removed, additional enforcement measures will be considered. No header, no signature, just more authoritarian poetry printed in bold font. I laughed, out loud, for the first time in days, because what they didn't realize was that I'd already thought of everything. That night, I wheeled the mailbox back into the driveway, covered it with a custom-fitted tarp. Then, at 5 a.m., I moved it 10 feet forward. The next morning, 10 feet back. On the third morning, I attached it to my truck and drove it around the block before parking it again, legally resetting the stationary clock. They'd created the rules. I just read them better. But the mailbox was more than an object now. It became a conversation. Strangers started showing up. A local blogger posted a photo with the caption, "When your HOA goes too far," and within hours, it had over 2,000 shares. A minor local influencer asked if he could feature it in a video. I declined. This wasn't about attention. Not yet. It was about control, about ownership, about drawing a line no one could erase. The HOA, of course, retaliated. I woke up one morning to find orange cones placed on either side of the mailbox trailer, with a laminated sign zip-tied to one cone. Pending review. Unauthorized mobile display. They were making up categories now. But I didn't touch the cones. I just moved the mailbox 10 feet forward the next morning. The passive aggression escalated quickly. Someone spread fresh mulch around the common area trees. In June, when no planting occurred. I knew why. They were trying to make everything else look pristine, to isolate me as the eyesore. But it didn't work. By then, the neighbors were too curious. One woman knocked on my door. "I got fined last year for putting fairy lights on my fence," she whispered. No one else did. They said it was too distracting from the sidewalk. "But yours, I think it's brilliant." Another neighbor left a post-it note on my truck. "Thank you for not backing down." We see it too. For the first time, I realized something profound. This wasn't about mailboxes. Not mine. Not anyone's. It was about erasure, about flattening everyone into a quiet, beige sameness. The mailbox on wheels had become a mirror. People were seeing their own frustrations reflected in it, their own stories, their own quiet battles with an invisible, unaccountable authority. And the board knew it. That's when they tried to make it personal. A second letter arrived, this time typed on official HOA letterhead and delivered via certified mail. It included photographs of my truck, timestamps, and a vague reference to possible misuse of residential zoning for storage of oversized decorative implements. They were inventing jargon now, trying to intimidate with language. I framed that letter, hung in the garage. They didn't scare me anymore, because the mailbox had already done its job. It had become bigger than the neighborhood, bigger than the rules, bigger than them. And they couldn't will it away. The fines started showing up daily, small, folded envelopes with thin strips of tape securing them to my front door. The paper inside was the same recycled format, each printed in thick black ink with red emphasis on dollar amounts. $50 for continued non-compliance. $75 for obstruction of community walkways, $100 for repeated infractions. No one knocked. No one rang the bell. The letters simply appeared each morning like some twisted form of ritual. Always unsigned. It was coordinated, deliberate. And every day, I moved the mailbox on wheels 10 feet forward, 10 feet back, or hitched it to the truck and did a slow drive around the block just to reset the timer on their so-called visual disruption clause. Every letter they sent was met with proof of motion. But that didn't matter to them. They didn't want rule following. They wanted surrender. I began to notice things. Subtle changes. Someone began leaving comments on my mailbox online posts. Anonymous usernames. Vague threats disguised as sarcasm. Hope your truck breaks, or tight winking face. Looks flammable, LOL. Ever consider moving somewhere you're actually welcome? At first, I shrugged them off. Internet noise. But then, a shadow moved through the corner of my vision one night while I worked in the driveway. I turned fast, flashlight in hand, nothing. Just silence. Still air. Then, 2 days later, I noticed a thin, fresh scratch along the side of the mailbox trailer. Not deep, but long, like someone had dragged a key across it. The neighborhood had grown quiet around me. Not empty, just quieter in the way people get when they're told not to speak. One neighbor wouldn't meet my eyes anymore. Another, who once complimented my craftsmanship, started pulling into their garage faster than usual, door already half shut before the car even stopped. Someone was watching. Not openly, but consistently. The feeling grew stronger each day. That's when I decided to install the camera. It was small, discreet, barely the size of a cigarette lighter. I mounted it under the eaves of the garage, aimed squarely at the driveway and street beyond. It recorded in silence, day and night, triggered by motion. The first few nights were uneventful. Just footage of passing cars, the occasional raccoon, porch lights flickering across the street. Then on the fifth night, at 3:17 a.m., the camera caught something. A figure moved along the sidewalk in a slow, practiced walk, deliberate, confident. Not a jogger, not someone walking a dog. This person wore a hoodie pulled low and held something rectangular in their hand. They paused directly in front of the mailbox trailer for 23 seconds. Then they pointed the object, maybe a phone, maybe a small camera, toward it. A red light blinked briefly on the screen. Then the person walked away, melting back into the night. I replayed it over and over. The figure was too distant to identify, but the posture told me everything. This wasn't random. This was documentation. Surveillance. Why? The next day, I climbed the ladder to check the view from above. That's when I saw it. A second camera, nail high up in the branches of the maple tree across the street. Its lens pointed directly at my driveway. It was disguised. Poorly. The base was wrapped in dark tape. The mounting bracket haphazardly hidden under a cluster of leaves. But there was watching. I took photos, documented the angle, the housing, the reflective curve of the lens. It didn't belong to the city. Too small. No sticker. No visible ID number. Someone had placed it there without permission. Someone was spying, not just observing. This wasn't an HOA tactic anymore. This was something personal. I waited until nightfall before climbing the tree. A simple pair of wire cutters did the job. I removed the camera carefully, placed it in a sealed bag, and stored it in my garage. I didn't know if removing it was legal, but I didn't care. I didn't plan it on someone else's property. I didn't break that trust. Inside the camera was a micro SD card. I plugged it into an adapter and connected it to my laptop. 3 folders, all labeled by date. Footage dating back weeks. Angles zoomed and tight on my trailer, my truck's license plate, even the side of my house. One video showed me unloading lumber at dusk, another catching me crouched beside the mailbox polishing a brass fitting. Every clip was time-stamped. Every frame focused on my movements. This wasn't surveillance. It was tracking, and someone wanted me to know. The next morning, a third letter was taped to my door. Larger this time. An 8.5 by 11 sheet, bold red across the top. Cease and desist. Unauthorized conduct and obstruction of neighborhood harmony. This one had a logo, a printed name, Linda M. Castle, President, HOA Board. They'd come out of the shadows. I scanned the letter. It was full of legalese, vague references to upsetting community balance and undermining the credibility of established authorities. There were no specific laws cited, no real consequences mentioned, just language designed to intimidate. And buried at the bottom, in the smallest font, was a line that chilled me more than anything else. Further antagonism may result in board-recommended legal action to ensure neighborhood tranquility. Tranquility. That was their word for silence. I sat at the dining table, the letter open in front of me, the footage still on my laptop screen. I thought about what that figure had really been doing at 3:17 a.m. I thought about the hidden camera, the scratched paint, the way the neighbors had begun to vanish into themselves. This wasn't about a mailbox anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. They were trying to break me. But instead, they made me careful. I installed 2 more cameras. I set up a motion alert system linked to my phone. I started documenting every new violation, every letter, every incident, cataloged in folders by date, time, and subject. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was building a case. And then, late one night, my phone buzzed. An email. No subject line. No signature. Just a few lines of text. They've done this before. You're not the first. Check your bylaws. Look at property flips from last year. Some of us couldn't fight back. You still can. Be careful. They're watching more than just you. Attached was a PDF. Inside, a chain of internal emails, marked confidential, between 3 board members. Talking about me. Discussing ways to accelerate compliance through financial pressure, suggesting that long-term stubbornness could be resolved via forced legal actions. My name was there. So were others. This was never just about property rules. It was a campaign, and I wasn't the only target. The email had no name, no reply address, just that one message, cold and deliberate, like it had been typed under fluorescent lights in the middle of the night. The tone was cautious, restrained but not timid. It read like someone who'd waited too long to speak, but finally couldn't stay quiet anymore. The kind of message you only send when you're sure you've already lost something. Inside the PDF, I found what I had suspected for weeks. Internal HOA correspondence, some recent, some dating back nearly a year. Dozens of emails, marked private or internal use only, casually discussing tactics that sounded less like neighborhood management and more like silent warfare. I scrolled through screen after screen of damning text. Targeted resident continues noncompliance. Suggest leveraging fines to apply financial pressure. Visibility increasing online. Keep official response minimal. If this escalates, we may need to create a secondary justification. Use landscaping or vehicle visibility if needed. That last line stopped me cold. I read it again and again. These weren't one-off comments. They were coordinated strategies. A playbook. Behind every bland notice and clipboard citation was a group of people deliberately hunting for ways to force residents out or wear them down until they gave up. The name at the center of every thread was Linda M. Castle, HOA president. The tone of her emails varied. At times formal, at times cutting, but always in control. One thread titled Mailbox Issue, Repercussions, included a sentence that made my blood run cold. We can't allow this to gain sympathy. Once residents begin to think they have individual power, the entire enforcement system collapses. That was their fear, not the mailbox, not the trailer, not even the movement building around it. What they feared was the idea of resistance, of someone refusing to play along. Buried further down were references to others, people I'd never met. Addresses, incident notes, quiet admissions of success. 143 pines sold. Pressure campaign worked faster than anticipated. Unit 207 responded to 3 violations in 1 week. Repainted door. Removed planter. Fence replaced. Immediate compliance. Pressure campaign. They had a name for it. I printed everything. Every email. Every screenshot. I filled a manila folder and locked it away. My heart was thudding with adrenaline, rage, and something else. Something sharper. Resolve. The next day, I left the mailbox trailer right at the edge of my property line. The sun hit it just right, bouncing gleaming light from the copper panels. I sat on the porch with a coffee in hand, and watched as Linda drove by slowly in her white SUV. She didn't wave, didn't glare, just stared straight ahead, her hands at 10 and 2. But she saw me, and she knew that I knew. Later that afternoon, I walked the neighborhood again, but not to take photos or measure curbs. This time I knocked on doors. Some didn't answer. Some peeked through blinds. But enough opened. I spoke carefully. Not about rebellion. Not about war. Just about rights. About fairness. About clarity. I told them about the violations I'd received. Then I asked if they had ever gotten one they didn't understand. And the stories came pouring out. A woman whose decorative flag was deemed political. It said, "Welcome." A couple fined for keeping a lemon tree visible from the street. A man who'd received a citation for wind chimes, only to find out later that no such rule existed. He'd taken them down anyway. Everyone had a version of it. Everyone had complied. Out of fear, out of confusion, out of fatigue. And none of them had ever seen a copy of these internal discussions, until now. I printed a few redacted pages and showed them, just enough to prove what I was saying. Their eyes widened. One woman teared up. "No wonder they wanted us quiet," she whispered. "They've been manipulating all of us." The word "us" stuck in my mind. I created an email list, a closed group, invited only those who spoke up, who asked questions, who wanted to do more than comply. Within 2 days, we had 24 names. Then, 37. By the end of the week, we had more than 50. People began comparing violation letters, highlighting similarities, timelines, penalty patterns. They started organizing, too. Not with protests. Not yet. But with visibility. Unity. One morning, 7 other homes placed identical signs in their windows. "This home believes in transparency." Linda called an emergency HOA meeting that night. I went. She looked tired, uncertain, but her voice was still sharp. "There's a growing amount of misinformation circulating about this board," she said flatly. "We'd like to remind all residents that the HOA exists to maintain standards, not to accommodate individual agendas." I stood when the floor opened. "I have documentation," I said. Emails, direct quotes, confirming that violations were used strategically to push out homeowners and punish dissent. That's not standard maintenance. That's targeted abuse. Someone clapped. Then another. Then the room fell into stunned silence. Linda tried to recover. "If any member believes they've been unfairly treated, there are appeal procedures. Appeals that go to the same people who issued the violations." I interrupted. "Appeals that are ignored, redacted, hidden from meeting records. I've read the minutes. I've seen what's left out." The room shifted. Tension thickened. And then a man stood in the back. "I got a letter about my kid's sandbox," he said. "Said it was a safety hazard. It's made of recycled wood and sits behind a fence. No one can even see it." Linda didn't respond. Someone else stood up. "My trash cans got me fined. Once. I was out of town. They were out for 1 extra day. The fine was $125. Now the room was murmuring. Voices rising. Something was happening. A slow, powerful cracking of the wall they'd built. The silence that had protected the board for years was now broken. And once broken, silence doesn't heal. The next morning, an envelope arrived at my door. This one was different, thicker, official. Inside was a legal notification, an invitation to mediation with the HOA to resolve ongoing community disputes. Carefully worded, framed as concern, but it was a retreat. They knew they were exposed. But I wasn't ready to settle, because this wasn't just about my trailer, or my mailbox, or even me. It was about the people who had been pushed around quietly, fined into obedience, and manipulated into silence. It was about the board that forgot it served a community and not itself. I opened a new email that night. Type a message. Added an attachment. Subject line: "What the HOA doesn't want you to see." And I hit send. The idea came to me in a moment of absolute stillness. No fire, no fury, just silence and clarity. They had spent months trying to box me in, to reduce me down to a list of infractions and technicalities. They wanted a concession. What they got was a parade. It began with a single email to the neighborhood list I'd created, now numbering over 80 residents. Subject line: "Let's roll." I proposed a demonstration, not of defiance, but of creativity. A nonviolent, non-destructive, fully compliant display of community expression. Something visual, something mobile, something unforgettable. We would build mailboxes. Not just any mailboxes. Mobile ones. Rolling ones. Ones mounted on wagons, on scooters, on toy trucks and dollies. Some absurd. Some elegant. Some painted in rainbow pastels, others in matte black. It didn't matter what they looked like, only that they rolled. We'd call it the Mailbox Parade. At first, I expected maybe 5 or 6 people to show interest. But the response stunned me. Within days, over 30 households pledged to participate. They sent photos of their prototypes. One person had strapped a mailbox to a toddler's red tricycle. Another had mounted 3 mailboxes side by side on a wheelbarrow and labeled them past, present, and pending HOA violation. One family built theirs into a rolling planter box, with flowers blooming from the top and a tiny flag that read, "Still delivering." The movement had become contagious. Where fear once held the community in check, humor and solidarity had begun to root themselves in its place. We set the date for a Saturday morning, just 2 weeks out. Just enough time for everyone to finish building and decorating. We didn't ask for permits. We weren't blocking roads or disturbing peace. We'd stay on sidewalks, driveways, and private yards. But we made sure every participant understood. Document everything. Photos, videos, statements. If the HOA tried to interfere, we'd have proof and public attention. Word spread fast. Local blogs picked up the story. A community Facebook group, previously silent and policed by board members, began lighting up with photos of half-built mailbox floats and messages of support. Even a small-town news station reached out, asking if they could cover a unique neighborhood event inspired by homeowner solidarity. Linda and the remaining board members tried to get ahead of it. They sent out an urgent bulletin titled, "Unauthorized Gathering Notice, Potential Neighborhood Disruption." It warned of traffic congestion, noise complaints, and, my personal favorite, a rise in divisive behavior stemming from misinformed residents. But it was too late. The people weren't misinformed anymore. On parade day, the neighborhood bloomed. It started slow. A child in a dinosaur onesie pulled a wagon with a glittery mailbox attached, wobbling over the cracks in the sidewalk. Then came a woman on roller skates, guiding a stroller with an oversized mailbox shell mounted on it, painted like a unicorn. One by one, they joined. A man with a fishing vest pushed a dolly carrying a full metal mailbox labeled, "For complaints, return to sender." I wheeled out my original, the copper-trimmed, trailer-mounted monument that had started it all. It gleamed under the rising sun like armor. I added streamers and speakers this time, playing an old-school mail carrier jingle on loop. Neighbors stood in yards cheering, clapping. Some joined last minute with boxes taped to shopping carts or strapped to scooters. Others just followed the rolling mass on foot, waving handmade signs. Let residents breathe. Mailboxes matter. Silence is no longer a policy. By mid-morning, the HOA board emerged from their homes. They didn't join. They didn't speak. They just watched, hands folded, jaws tight. Linda stood on her porch with a phone in her hand, recording, likely searching for anything she could use to justify new citations. But there was nothing. Everything was legal. Everything was peaceful. Everything was witnessed. That afternoon, videos of the event hit social media. A 20-second clip of a mailbox mounted on an old Roomba went viral. A teacher from a nearby school sent us a message, saying she planned to use it in a classroom project about civic expression. What began as an act of quiet retaliation had become something bigger, a story about reclaiming ownership in a space that had been hollowed out by fear. The fallout came fast, faster than any of us expected. 3 days after the parade, a public petition was circulated demanding a full audit of the HOA's operations. Hundreds of digital signatures appeared in under 48 hours. Someone, perhaps the same anonymous whistleblower who had first emailed me, leaked a financial discrepancy, thousands of dollars in administrative funds rerouted over the past fiscal year with no clear paper trail. The local news ran the story. The board called an emergency town hall. Linda did not attend. At that meeting, the treasurer resigned on the spot. So did the vice president. A third member admitted she had signed off on violation notices without ever reviewing the properties firsthand. When asked why, she only said, "It was easier that way." The crowd didn't shout her down. They didn't need to. The truth had already done the job. The HOA was dissolved for 30 days pending reorganization. A full financial audit was initiated by an outside agency. The anonymous whistleblower came forward, a young man named Ryan, barely 30, who had joined the board with idealism and quickly learned it was a smokescreen for control. He was met with applause. Within a month, new board elections were held, this time with oversight, transparency, and public vetting. I didn't run. I didn't need to. Enough had changed. As for the mailbox trailer, I no longer parked it at the edge of my driveway. It sits at the entrance to the neighborhood now, refitted, mounted on a stone pedestal, a small plaque beneath it that reads, "In honor of expression, in defiance of silence, in defense of home." People still slow down when they drive past. Some stop and take pictures. Others leave handwritten notes tucked into the mail slot. Notes of gratitude, of stories of small moments when they, too, felt like they were being watched, pressured, silenced. And every now and then I check that slot and smile. Not because I won, but because none of us are invisible anymore.